Hey guys, it's John and Anam, and we're back for another episode after a long sabbatical. And I'm not sure if you can call it that, if it's only been 4 episodes, but we're gonna leave it at that. And what we wanted to talk about was what we've learned in the past few months that we were, I guess, gone, and things that we feel like God has definitely showed us, and things that we need to develop and work on still. And so to kind of give you guys a little bit of context, we basically agreed to do a bunch of things in terms of ministry, along with other things as well. And then to give more context, none of those things were bad. None of those things were unhealthy. We were actually really amped up and really excited for a lot of the things that we were going to do this summer. And what it boiled down to, what we realized is we overcommitted. And I think what we want to kind of put out there in this episode is, I don't think it matters how good something is. If you have a lot of things on your plate, it can definitely burn you out. So in this episode, we're going to talk about putting boundaries down, prioritizing things, and also accepting yourself, where you can also accept your walk with God where you are, and understanding that what works for one person may not work for you. It all just depends, again, where you are, and praying about it, and asking God for help in that area as well. So we're actually going to go through some pointers that we listed off here and provide some biblical context to it, along with things that we believe God is also showing us in our own journey with these things. So the first thing that I wanted to start off with is that I personally didn't realize how introverted I was until we got into some of these things. And it's not, being introverted isn't bad, but I think what I was starting to feel over time was that I was starting to resent the fact that I was so introverted, because I felt so de-energized in some situations, and kind of felt like my energy was just waning a lot.
I kind of felt the same, not gonna lie. Like, I don't know how many of y'all have taken the 16 personalities test or quiz. Shout out to any campaigners. But for the most part, I think we like to be social, and there's a spectrum there. But for me, I thought like, oh man, like I thrive off of people. I love social gatherings. I love being able to connect. But like the amount of stuff we had to do, I realized I was dying slowly, because I had so many things that I wanted to do, but a lot of the things that I needed for myself to keep myself going were getting put on the back burner. And I just didn't see that. I didn't see that happening in advance. And when I got there, I was just like, wait, but this must be good. Like, I'm doing God's will. Why is it that like all of a sudden I'm on E?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think when I took the test, I didn't realize, I think I was 87% introverted.
Wild.
And I wasn't expecting that. But I think I felt the same way, where I felt like I was starting to resent myself for
Not keeping up.
not being able to keep up, because I just wanted to have more energy, and I just didn't know where to get that from. But I will say that the thing that was the issue, but the thing that God was showing me through it, or after a while, like I started realizing God was trying to show me, was embrace it. In terms of, it's okay if you're de-energized when you're around people for so long. Like, you're not meant to be energetic after this many days of being around people. And it made me feel like better, and it made me feel like I need to give more grace to myself. And I know I personally feel like over time I will be maybe less introverted. Like, I don't think extroverted is the goal either. Like, I don't think we should be one or the other. I think we should just accept where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, though, I want to be a little bit more extroverted. So I feel like God is working with me to slowly get there, get to the point where I can be around people for multiple days, even do ministry things for multiple days and not get de-energized
Or burnt out.
Yeah, so de-energized that I'm just like not happy.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting? Like, I kind of feel like being introverted, I respect a lot of people who are like fully introverted only because they can choose to be silent in the most awkward moments. Like,
There's no regrets.
Yes, you're like, I've seen some introverts just like, oh, I'm not going to talk. You could go ahead. And I'm just like,
I think that's me.
yeah. And I will run my mouth because I'm so awkward and like terrible with silent moments. I always want to have a conversation going. So like my mind is just going. But like, I think there's amazing qualities in both. But my point is, I think it's good to try to find some type of balance in all of that.
And then the other thing I want to highlight here is, like, I think in ministry specifically, I think extrovertedness is like put on a pedestal.
Oh, duff.
And I really want to emphasize, if you want to do ministry, you do not have to be extroverted for that. You embrace your introversion, figure out ways to manage getting time alone and, you know, taking care of yourself and still being around people and understanding, like, it'll look different for everyone. But yeah, just extroversion isn't the goal. I think if you're extroverted, that's awesome. I think if you're introverted, that's awesome. And I think it's just finding that balance and then asking God, do I need to be more social? Do I need to be less social? Do I need to be around more people to do ministry? Do I need to be around less people to do ministry? Like, how do you want me to work through this?
So for those of you who don't know who Jackie Perry is, she's amazing. And we were able to, we'll probably touch on that in a bit, but we were able to go to Preston Perry's, it was for men, right?
It was for relationships. So it's like, we need to talk tour.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we went to that in late August. And he had, at some point, and I've heard this before, but I was really excited to hear him emphasize this, but he basically mentioned this idea that as a man, being aggressive is typically put as an ideal. Like, a lot of people look to a guy to be assertive and aggressive, but he had mentioned something along the lines of, and forgive me if I'm like messing it up, I'm paraphrasing, but he had said that you could be silent and still be assertive, or you can still be a man while also being silent. And it reminded me of what you're saying. You don't necessarily have to be extroverted to be able to carry out ministry on God's behalf.
Yeah.
There are a lot of prophets that didn't have to say much to be able to get their points across.
So that was the first point of things that we are learning about ministry. The second thing is setting boundaries. And this may sound like common sense. You have to set down boundaries. But I guess it wasn't common sense to us.
Teach us.
But we'll talk about it. So this is our first time as a couple doing ministry together. And we ourselves struggle with boundaries because we're newly married. We're still trying to figure that out too. Boundaries with each other and other people and things like that. And then also the fact that you're a little bit more extroverted than me. I'm a little bit more introverted than you. How do we set those boundaries? So now add ministry to the mix. We're just kind of confused. So,
Amen.
So a couple of things I want to highlight here where God is for boundaries. So in Genesis, God sets boundaries in the Garden of Eden by giving Adam and Eve a specific command that they can eat from any tree that they want, but they just can't eat from this tree, this specific tree, right? So it's a boundary, and it was a boundary that is good. That was supposed to be something
to
good, protect them, good for them, that would make them live joyously. So there's that. Another example is God has this boundary of Sabbath as a day of rest. There's a reason for it. And in Mark, the reason is that Sabbath is made for man, not man for Sabbath, which made me realize God isn't just setting these boundaries. He's also kind of explaining why are these boundaries being set. It's because we need it. So boundaries can go two ways. It could be to prevent things from taking advantage of you, but also because you might take advantage of yourself, right? So it's that boundary of...
You might exploit yourself.
Yeah, you might exploit yourself. Other things might not exploit you. You might exploit yourself. And so there needs to be a boundary in that. And I think what we didn't realize was, because we were so new to this, we're doing this as a couple for the first time, we didn't know what boundaries to put, and we kind of like jumped in and didn't have enough time to kind of figure those things out. And then when I realized it was boundaries, in my mind, I've associated boundaries so much with like not like being able to, like, if you have boundaries, that means that there's something wrong because you're not doing enough. I don't know why, but it's like maybe being like, hey, on this day, I'm not going to do anything. And I'm like, well, that's selfish. You should be doing things. So it's like I would shame myself for even starting to think of boundaries during this time.
So to piggyback off of what Anam was mentioning, there is this book called A Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. And essentially he mentioned that like there can be a million good things out there. And if you don't have boundaries and you try to accomplish all these good things at one time, you're basically setting yourself up for failure. You won't have the bandwidth to be able to handle all of that. And I've always known myself to like want to do everything at once. I used to want to like hit the gym and swim and do boxing and I realized there's seasons for these things, and without setting these limitations, you can burn out. Jackie Perry actually mentioned something at the conference we went to yesterday. She basically said that when you're trying to do all these things on your own, God's plan for you will never be on the strengths that you have. You will always be required to look for him for that strength so that you can fulfill the ministry that he is trying to do in your life. So essentially she mentioned like you won't be able to burn out if you're relying on God. But I think boundaries are extremely necessary when you're trying to do ministry and when you're trying to look for your purpose in God's world.
And what I also wanted to look at were stories in the Bible that specifically highlight boundaries. And I came across this one amazing story in Exodus 18, where Jethro is basically giving Moses, telling Moses that he needs to put down boundaries to be able to do his job. So it starts in verse 17. It says, Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, replied, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone." And I thought that was amazing to read. Like Moses, did amazing things. He was chosen by God to take Israel out of Egypt. And after such like a feat, then he's basically being told, you can't do it all by yourself. You have to like get some help. You have to, you can't look at yourself as someone who is just because maybe God appointed you, no one can help you, right? Because it goes on into verse 21, where Jethro, this is where he puts down, or he suggests a boundary. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. And have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied.
Wow. Delegating. He's delegating the work.
Yeah. And this relates to boundaries in terms of like have those limitations of if you're doing work in ministry, ask for help. It's not all on you.
And one of my professors kind of mentioned this. you're not in a church setting or in a ministry setting so that you could play God, so that you could take on all this responsibility. As a matter of fact, there will be several times where you need to be poured into. You can't take on the responsibility of constantly pouring out and leaving everything at the pulpit and doing everything you can possible to be able to meet the needs of others, and no one's trying to help you out. It'll leave you high and dry real quick.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think this showed us in terms of boundaries, not just taking it on for ourselves, knowing that we can ask people for help. That's okay. Just because we are responsible for this task doesn't mean it's every single part of it has to be done by us, right? We can ask for help from people to make this happen. The next thing I want to talk about is what are you saying yes to and what you're saying no to. In Matthew 5:37, Jesus teaches about letting your yeses be yes and noes be noes. And so I think in the beginning of starting this summer with all these ministry things, I was saying yes to a lot of stuff. I think we were both saying yes to it and not really thinking about it, thinking about the consequences. And then eventually I was like, you know what? I really need to say no. Like, I think halfway through, I started thinking I need to start saying no. And then my people-pleasing tendencies would kick in, where I'm like, throughout the week or throughout the day, let's say, for example, I know someone is going to ask me something, and I'm just like, nope, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it, God. I'm not going to say yes. I'm not going to say yes. And then they ask me, like, hey, can you do this? And I'm like, yeah, I can do this. And I'm already kicking myself in the butt for saying yes.
Or you'll say no, and then like right before the event is about to happen, you switch up and you're just like, all right, I got it. I can do it. And I'm like, I think there's room for conviction. Don't get me wrong. Like, God will impress you if you need to do something, but we also need to be more mindful if we already have these people pleasing tendencies. Is it God, or is it your own flesh trying to take accountability for things that weren't delegated to you by God, and you're just trying to show up so that you can save face at the end of the day? I know that's been the case for me sometimes, where I forgot who mentioned it to me, but they were like, well, if you had a choice to really answer the way that you wanted to, how would you? And are you answering in accordance with a fear of being, I don't know, put down because now people will see you in a certain light for not wanting to step up to the opportunity, right? If we're able to be intentional with why we're doing a certain thing, and we're being intentional with our prayers, God will give us a clear chance to do what needs to be done. It doesn't mean to second guess things that God has already given to you either. So if you've signed up to do the children's story, or to do a ministry of some sort, or just to even help somebody out whenever the chance arose, right? Handle that, enjoy that, and ask God to bless you in it and bless the other person in it. But then also ask God, if you feel any type of way about it after the fact, hey, God, was this for me, or did I take it on my own accord?
Yeah. To go back, though, to what you were saying initially, is it guilt or is it shame? And I think oftentimes we confuse guilt with shame, think that it's God, and so that's where the yes comes from. When we're not realizing, in actuality, we're shaming ourselves because we feel like there's these expectations that need to be met that we're not meeting. Whereas I think if it's God will convict you in a way that it doesn't feel like shame. It's not like you coming down on yourself for it.
Condemnation.
Yeah. I feel like it just looks different. And so I know for me, it was like, well, you have the time. And it's like, just because it's a free day doesn't mean it's free time. Because one thing that I've learned from therapy is free time doesn't mean availability. It basically means like free time is you set aside that free time, and that's that free time. Because just because you're alone and doing nothing doesn't mean you got free time. It means you are spending time by yourself. You are literally scheduling time to sit on the couch for like 2 hours.
Read your Bible.
And just watching TV. Like, I don't know. That's okay. But like literally scheduling, this is when my free time is.
You could tell what we do in our free times, right? I'm like, read the
Shut
Bible,
up. Oh my
watch TV,
goodness.
binge Netflix. No, I'm totally kidding.
But yeah, so basically it's differentiate what is shame and what is guilt. And to be completely honest, in the second part of what you said, when I read that the whole let your yeses be yes and your no's be no, I was just like, wow. Because I think what I was starting to feel was resentment towards the fact that I even said yes. And so I was going into these things with not an amazing heart for it.
Begrudgingly.
Yeah, and I hated it. Yeah. I would start, then more shame would come in because I was kicking myself in the butt for thinking this way and being that Debbie Downer. Just
dang, Debbie.
Shut up. Oh my goodness. But I felt like I need to change my attitude because I said yes. Whose fault was it to say yes? It was mine. Can't blame God. Can't blame the other people, even though I so badly wanted to. I can't because they didn't pressure me into it. I pressured myself into it. And so how do I walk into these commitments with the good heart, like with what you're talking about,
and integrity,
and then afterwards being like, God, I don't want to do this again. Like, or I don't think I want to do this again. Help me to say no more firmly, or like give me a sign that like, or talk to me, or just tell me what do I need to do so that I don't put myself in this position next time. And that's a huge lesson for me because I feel like it all just boils down to shame at the end of the day. If you don't see it in that way, you're going to shame yourself for saying yes. You're going to shame yourself for not being present enough. Then you're going to shame yourself for being resentful. And then it's like a little
and it's
infection.
wild. And this is all based off of fear.
Yes.
If we like, you're right, it is shame, but then shame boils down to fear. Fear is probably this idea of like, well, I'm going to lose faith, or I'm not going to be liked, or something, right? Which is shame. What's interesting is that like the devil capitalizes off of fear. So like he's considered the father of lies. How frequently is he lying? We don't know. We always think, oh, maybe he just lied to me. And I mean, not we, I always used to feel like, oh yeah, for sure. He like lies once a day, or maybe even like twice. But like, how do you know he's not just like...
I think everything he says is a lie.
Well, yeah, absolutely. His entire career, my guy he doesn't even need to sleep. Why do you think he needs to chill out before he hits you with the next wave of attacks? And the thing that scripture tells us about that is if you clean out the temple and you don't fill the temple, it will, like, more demons will come back. More situations will come back. And I think that's the, like, you have a very small window of driving him out and putting something good in before he attempts to come back. And when he does come back, he's not going to come back small. He's going to try to go hard at... Yeah. Anyways, my point is that we often feed into the lies that he gives or prompts or even presents in front of us. And every time we do that and we don't go to God and try to figure out, okay, God, like, where am I at in all of this? Like, should I actually be doing this? Or am I going to get shamed into submission and do this thing that's not necessarily healthy for me at the moment? And it'll hurt people around me. We need to, I don't know, just for me at least, I need to be more mindful of what I'm committing to. And if I do commit to it, cool. But if it doesn't work out, then yeah.
So boiling it down to what you're saying, walk it with integrity with your yeses, but then also walking with your integrity or in integrity with your no's.
Yeah.
So when you have to say no, don't feel ashamed about it either. Walk with confidence in the fact that after you've prayed and asked God and you're feeling God is telling you, no, don't agree to this, right? Walk in that. Don't feel ashamed about it.
Desperate to try to meet the needs of others. I mean, there will be moments, but like God will let you know. And one time I had a really gracious boss who I was overwhelmed with schoolwork, and I was in a ton of different clubs, and I was trying to learn a whole bunch of stuff. And I was also doing work on the side, and I told him, like, I'm gonna have to leave this job. And I I was bent out of shape thinking about, I was really messed up. I was like, man, I am so unreliable, and Satan will feed you a whole bunch of things about yourself in those moments so that you won't even be open with what's going on. My boss gave me the opportunity to leave the job, and he was like, yo, John, there will be another person to fill your spot. God will supply. You don't have to feel like the world is all on your shoulders. And the grace he gave me with that made me think, wow, I need to have that mindset. I'm not irreplaceable. God will bring up another person to support the person in need when it is due time.
Yeah, and then to like just highlight that a little bit is, if you did say yes and you're feeling super burnt out after praying about it and praying about it and praying about it, it is okay to make it a no. Right? And then walking away from that as like, I need to learn from this and see how to avoid to the best of my ability that this doesn't happen again.
And apologizing for any situations that may have occurred throughout it. You need to have peace when you go into some of these things, and that peace needs to come from the Lord.
So the next one is, how is whatever you accepted, whatever you got yourself into, how is it affecting, or if it is at all affecting your spiritual life? And I think for me, it was affecting it to this degree that it was insane. We were doing ministry stuff, but I was not connecting to God. I felt like I wasn't, to be like vulnerable here, I struggle with the relationship with God sometimes. And so by doing ministry and then now it's getting worse, that's not good. That's actually a red flag. And I did not realize that until a few months after.
It's interesting because the first thing that popped up into mind when you said that was, I just got into seminary, and seminary is kind of funny. Like, I read about the idea of seminary 2.5 years ago, I think, or 3 at this point. And like, maybe Reddit isn't the best place for everything, but there was a little bit of truth to it. There's this idea that when you're in seminary, it's very easy for your heart to be hardened because you think you're doing the right thing over and over. And by doing this thing, it's substituting out a relationship with God. So you're kind of like in the know, you know these things, let's say, but you're not, you don't have an authentic relationship with God that can pull you through those hard moments. Yeah. And that's one of my fears. I actually don't want to get to this place where I think I know something. I need to have the humility to be able to rely on him and not allow this thing to be enough for me, or to feel like once I graduated from the seminary, now I'm good. Because often I think when you think in terms of this graduation mindset, you leave God right on that stage once you walk off.
Yeah. And who is the perfect person in the Bible who did ministry? Basically perfectly.
Jesus.
Yep. So if you look at Jesus and how he does ministry, there's so many times where he is tending and taking care of his spiritual life, his connection with God and the Father. And in Matthew 14, he basically here says Jesus withdraws to a solitary place to pray. So here, having a commentary here, it says, Jesus was a man of prayer, and finally he was able to find time by himself to pray. He prioritized that. If he is prioritizing that, why can't we prioritize it? And not just those prayers that are just those everyday memorization of prayers. It's like, no, those deep prayers of like, God, I need you in this. I'm about to do this right now. I'm about to go, talk to a bunch of people. I'm about to help a bunch of people. I'm about to do a Bible study. I really need you here.
Even prayers like just help.
Yes.
I feel like, man, I don't know if I could advocate for this enough, and I wish I could spend all my energies on just saying, hey, pray, and your prayers don't have to be long or lofty. They don't have to be concise. They need to be very in the moment, and like you need to have that ugly crying face on when you need to, so that you could get across to God. I mean, he knows how you feel, but do you know how you feel? He wants you to be vulnerable with him, and he'll lead you to the next step. But I don't know. I feel like we get stuck thinking that we don't have to pray as often as we really do.
Mm-hmm. And also in Mark 1:35 through 39, Jesus basically prioritizes his purpose. What is his purpose? And we'll kind of get into that in a second. But his purpose over the demands of the crowd. A commentary that we were reading basically said this about this scenario. After these healings, Jesus went by himself to a remote place and prayed. Despite the fact that there was great demand for him to stay, Jesus made it clear that he was to go to the adjacent towns in Galilee to preach. So even though people needed him to stay, even though his disciples were asking him to stay, because Jesus prayed and got in touch with God the Father, right? He was able to understand
his next assignment.
His next, what he was supposed to do next. And even though there was healings that needed to happen here, Jesus basically knew he needed to be somewhere else. So by having that connection with God and praying often to God, you're able to know, okay, God, I'm in this ministry. What do you want me to do next?
What's the next move?
And next, maybe the most rational thing, like healing the people here, that may sound like, again, common sense. Like obviously you would do that.
You would just keep going.
But for here, Jesus, he knew that God was telling him, you need to go somewhere else, right? And continue this ministry. And I feel like Jesus was able to do that because, again, he prayed.
And what's wild, like, I feel like that's such a blurry line. You could literally, like, what if he didn't know that God needed him, like God the Father needed him to go somewhere else? Like, what
if he didn't pray before that?
Yeah, he would have been, I mean, not stuck there all day, but like he would have been continuing his ministry there, and there would be people on the other side suffering still, and not being able to have that peace or that restoration in their lives. So like I've heard this before, a yes to this is a no to this. If he wasn't in touch with God to know the next move, he wouldn't have been over there to be able to. And yeah, it does mean that a yes to this is also a no to this, but like everything in due time. I think the idea that should be stressed here is he was in touch with God in order that he could continue to do his will.
And to highlight again, the thing that made the most sense wasn't God's will. So it's for us to understand, don't rely too much on your intuition, because intuition would say, here, go heal the people that you're in the town you're already in, right? But again, because he prayed, he knew that he needed to go.
So one more thing I wanted to add with regards to keeping a relationship with God alive and well. If you don't, you will naturally backslide into the enemy's territory. There is no like neutral zone where you're not giving into what God needs from you or what God is purposing for your life, and you're not falling into the enemy's hands. That there is no weird middle ground where you're not influenced by one or the other. You will naturally fall into depravity or fall into your own flesh and wind up exalting your own emotions and your own ideals if you're not constantly looking for God. And the only reason I bring that up is because I feel blessed to have an opportunity to be able to even go to the seminary. But honestly, if I don't humble myself before God every morning and every day and try to keep up a prayer life and be consistent, basically, I'm going to naturally fall into this idea of erecting my own altar, being super caught up in my own emotions and my own ideals of what I should become in my own life. And I've done that before when I wasn't looking for God, and that hasn't turned out nice. So I wanted to bring up John 8. This is the only person who knows what it is to do God's will perfectly. John 8, verse 49. Jesus is answering with, I do not have a demon, but let's go to 50. It says, I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks and judges. Most assuredly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never see death. And if we jump down to 54, he says, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father who honors me, of whom you say that he is your God. The point that I'm trying to bring out here is, if Jesus wasn't exalting himself as God, if he wasn't relying on his own understanding, his own will, and he was constantly looking for the Father and praying overnight prayers to try to understand what the next move was, why should we think that we should spend no time or very little amount of time or just not being authentic in the prayer time that we do have, and then making a move? You might wind up doing something that you selfishly might want, and it might hurt you at the very end. So yeah.
The last one we want to highlight here is priorities. I know you call it MVP. What does that mean again?
Most viable points.
Can you explain that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think it's a given with the MVP too, like most valuable player.
Yeah.
But the idea is you want to secure the things that are foundational to your well-being or to establishing the goal that you have in mind.
Mm-hmm. So here, I think our priorities, I don't know if you agree with it or not, but I think our priorities got neglected because ministry can't be your only priority.
Well, there's ministry to self, but that's a whole nother thing.
I'm saying ministry to others can't be the only priority. So to give you an example, certain priorities that got neglected for us was our hobbies, working out or just getting outside and exercising. Eating healthy got neglected. There was a lot of
that.
What?
I didn't regret that.
Okay, there was a lot of nights where we just had to do ramen.
I love ramen.
And for me, therapy also got neglected. And then dating each other even. Like our marriage. Like without even realizing it. We weren't even spending time.
Yeah.
We think that just because we're doing ministry together, that's spending time, that's dating. That's not dating.
I often felt like, oh man, this is amazing. I really always wanted like to be able to connect in this way, and I didn't notice that like you were low key burning out in the back, because like I'm naturally more extroverted, so I was keeping up to an extent up till I didn't, and then when I didn't realize you were like 3 blocks behind, and I'm just like, oh, you good?
But it's not like we were even interacting like that with each other. It was more so hosting and like trying to be there for people, not for each other.
No, I know.
So like I don't think it was dating still.
No, it wasn't dating. It was just, I think that it checked off this idea of
Ministry couple.
Ministry within, like I like having a relationship centered around God. So like that made me feel so excited, and then obviously naturally that would pour out into others, and so I didn't really notice the indicators that were like there saying, bro, you need to slow down. Your wife is introverted, she's like 3 blocks behind.
Oh my goodness.
I'm kidding.
Like lagging.
My guy is lagging in the background. She's like off the map somewhere.
Buffering.
You have that little logo. Anyways.
And one thing that my therapist said basically was like when you're stressed, stress basically means there's something going on that's adding too much to your life where you're not enjoying certain things anymore. So then she had me write down a list of things, all the things that I was doing, and it was just like, what are things that you have to do? You know, and I circled that. And then she's like, what are things that you want to do? And I circled some of those things, and it's like, what are things that you need to do? And all these things, and we kind of like started just categorizing things, and the whole point of it was to pick out the things that you don't need to do. And because the things that you have to do it. The things that you want to do, maybe those are things that, you kind of like sacrifice here and there a little bit. But she was even saying, don't take out everything you want to do out of your life either.
Yeah.
Leave some of the things that you want. You obviously have to leave all the things that you need that are like have to do. But are the things that like are
Bring
like
you joy in some way, shape, or form.
no, the like other things. There was like, you think that you need to do it, but do you really need to do it? Can you find someone else to do it? Things like that. And so that's how I was able to see, okay. And she was also with you, was helped me realize, wow, I'm actually not taking care of myself. So I'm not talking to God. I don't have that relationship with God. I'm not even taking care of myself the ways that I want to. I'm just kind of going like a robot and burning out and not giving myself that chance to like recoup.
Yeah.
And then when I was reading the Bible, I was like Googling all these things because I was just like, I need to find verses for these things. I need to find verses for boundaries and priorities and this and that. So the story that came about was basically the Mary and Martha thing. So in Luke 10:30-42, Jesus basically gently corrects Martha's overcommitment and encourages prioritizing the spiritual, what Mary was doing. So in the commentary that we were reading, it's a lot, but I think it's actually needed to be said. So it says, Martha, who did all the serving, was gently rebuked by Jesus, even though she was concerned to provide him hospitality, a highly respected virtue. So what she was doing was good, but there was a problem. Mary, her sister, who chose to receive rather than to serve, was commended, even though she seemed completely oblivious to the need of helping prepare food for their special guest. Mary sat at Jesus' feet listening to his words as a disciple would, despite the fact that in Jewish culture this was not a woman's place. Martha, on the other hand, perfectly fulfilled womanly expectations of the time in her preparations and servings. Martha's desire to serve was not the issue. But Martha is also described as distracted, worried, and troubled. She charged Mary with leaving her to serve alone and even insinuated that Jesus was indifferent to her plight. In fact, Martha was missing a golden opportunity to listen to and learn from Jesus. This was the one thing most needful that Mary chose, that Jesus would not allow to be taken away from her. So just to highlight this, so what Martha was doing was actually like culturally the norm. She was preparing for the guest, the special guest. Mary was being the disrespectful one in the Jewish culture by not helping her sister and just being with the guest, right? But it flips it that like they're saying, well, that's not the most important thing here. First most important was, what was Martha's heart condition? She was distracted, worried, and troubled. So she was doing all these things, but her heart, like she was just anxious. And so it lets us know that even if you feel like you're doing the right thing, where is your heart at? And are you listening to like what God could be telling you to do, or even like just your uncomfortability and being like, take a step back and do I need to take care of myself right now rather than do this? Do I need to be at Jesus' feet?
Yeah.
Instead of doing this right now? Will he even care if I'm doing this? Or you get what I mean?
Yeah. I wanted to throw this verse in, and so Matthew 7, verse 21, I'm blind. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. So I had asked somebody at the Glory event like this question of like, how can you tell God's will, such and such? And she basically explained this idea of an authentic relationship with God. And she said that the main motivating factor that keeps her to try to stick to a relationship with God is that verse. She doesn't want to be able to get to heaven, meet Jesus, right, or God, and then find out nothing you did was of any true significance. It was all based off of your own desires as to how you thought I should or how I would want you to act. And when I looked up lawlessness, and I had asked her a personal question for my own sake, and when I heard that, I was just like, oof, conviction. The lawlessness, I went to Google because I was like, there's got to be more to lawless than I'm picking up here. And it said a state of disorder due to a disregard of the law.
Wow.
And I was just like, why did I feel like that? It turned it into like a chat GBT statement, and it made it so much more clear. Like the picture is 4K now. We think we're abiding by some type of like rubric, some principle, some law, when in reality, whatever it is that Jesus, God, is asking of us, we're actually neglecting it because we have our own rendition of what it is we think he needs. And in this situation, it wasn't not being at his feet. It was exactly what she was doing that got her. Jesus is like, you are doing well. Like, you are in the right place, because he was going to leave soon. And homegirl was chilling, doing the dishes. And I think that's great. It's just on a moment to moment basis, we really need to ask God, like, where we should be.
Yeah. It just made me personally realize how taking care of yourself is a huge aspect of ministry. Don't over abuse it and take all this time to yourself.
Yeah.
Select what you said, MVPs. I need to do all these things every day to be a healthy individual,
Functioning individual,
to be able to serve people. And I think a big red flag is when those things are
not even being checked off.
Yeah.
One more thing. If you don't know what those things are, meditate on it. Like, pray to God, ask for the Holy Spirit to convict you of what those things are. Because like, I used to not be able to understand how my body even operated. I used to think, oh yeah, like I'll like stay up till late and then wake up early, and the Holy Spirit was like, bro, you don't even understand your like what you need from yourself. You're trying to abide by societal standards. Like, you should be doing this. Like, no, just pray to me. I'll let you know what you need, and then we'll move from there.
Yeah. And a little side note too, hobbies are a part of taking care of yourself. So don't like, maybe some hobbies need to be set to the side, right? Just to make some time for ministry, but not all the things that bring you joy, not all the things that like make you feel like you. So those are the things that ground you maybe a little bit. So don't completely take those things too.
I have a coloring book. Okay. And I really appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Hopefully this helped to kind of break down some of the things that, you know, you might be experiencing, as well if you're thinking about going into ministry or aren't in ministry or burnt out from ministry or whatever it may be. It doesn't just have to be ministry. It could just be serving people as well. But I think our goal was just to highlight some of the things that we've learned, some of the things that God has been, you know, making clear to us that we need to do, so that we can continue to be healthy individuals and a healthy couple as we try and go and serve his people.
Amen. So just before we bounce, there's just one thing I wanted to add. I got this from a book that my mom actually just gave me as a gift. And it speaks to the fact that it's so essential to acknowledge that Jesus is the light and we ought to walk in it. It says, without me, he says, you can do nothing. It is Jesus that we need. His light, his life, his spirit must be ours continually. Because the enemy knows when we undertake to do a work without the Lord, and he is there, ready to fill our minds with his evil suggestions that we may fall from our steadfastness. And that's just to give you a little bit of peace and comfort, knowing that if you just walk in that light, you won't go wrong. But as soon as you try to take things on yourself, it won't necessarily be a ministry for the Lord anymore. It'll be something that'll exalt you, and it'll also break you down. So yeah, thank you guys for listening to this. If you caught any piece of it or different pieces of it that made you feel any type of way, meditate on it, and we'll be back for the next one. Peace.
Okay, guys. And so what I wanted to do was...
One more time.
Okay.
You have to let me know when you're going to start. I was looking down.
Okay. 3.
I'm just like, yeah.
3, 2, 1.